I remember the cold first. It was a kind of cold that bit through fabric, through skin, straight into bone. Stockholm's air carried a sharpness, a clarity that felt almost cruel against my face as I stood outside Arlanda airport with my luggage at my feet. I pulled my coat tighter, waiting for her to appear, waiting for that laugh, the laugh she always gave when she thought she was being clever. But minutes passed, then more. My phone buzzed. A message from her lit up the screen. Good luck finding your way back. Consider this a prank winking face. At first, I actually smiled. It had to be a joke. That was her way. After all, always needing to keep control of the room. The moment, even me, I looked around, expecting her to emerge from behind pillar or a parked taxi, expecting the cameras of strangers to capture her little spectacle. But the sidewalk was empty except for a driver lighting a cigarette and a family herding their kids into a van. My smile faded. I called her. The line rang once, then cut to voicemail. I called again. Blocked. That was when the cold really sank in, not from the air, but from inside my chest. It spread outward, a hollow frost crawling through me as if my very blood had slowed. I checked my wallet. Barely any cash. She'd insisted she'd handle everything on this trip. Said it would be easier if all the tickets and reservations were in her name. Said I could relax for once. Just follow her lead. But there was no lead to follow anymore. Just the silence. I stood there for what felt like an hour, the wheels of my suitcase digging grooves into the slush. Travelers passed me, laughing, kissing, moving forward with lives that seemed intact, untouched. I felt like a statue abandoned in the wrong city. My wedding ring, silver, modest, the one we'd picked together when money was tight, caught the weak glow of the streetlight. It had once been a circle of safety. Now it burned against my skin, a reminder of a promise that had just turned into a shackle. I tried to tell myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she lost her phone. Maybe she'd gone ahead to the hotel. Maybe. But I knew. I had always known, somewhere deep, that her jokes weren't jokes. They were little knives, always testing how deep she could cut before I bled. I pulled my suitcase toward the taxi stand, but when I reached for my card, another truth hit me. My wallet was light because the credit cards were gone. She must have slipped them out earlier, probably when I left my jacket draped on the chair at the cafe. I laughed then, a dry, broken laugh that startled the driver who'd been about to open the trunk for me. I shook my head, waved him off, and staggered back toward the terminal. My own reflection in the sliding glass doors looked foreign, pale, eyes too wide, a man suddenly without gravity. Inside, I sat on a bench, pulled my phone out again, and scrolled through old photos of us. There she was, smiling on the beach, her hair catching sunlight, her hand on my chest as if she belonged there. I remembered the scent of her cologne, floral, sharp, still clinging to my scarf. I pressed the fabric to my face, inhaled, and felt the sharpness turn bitter. Every image, every memory, felt staged now. A theater performance I'd paid for with years of my life. The minutes bled into hours. Announcements echoed above me in a language I barely understood. My phone battery dipped lower, each percent a countdown not just to darkness, but to silence. I kept waiting for her call, for her voice to break through with a triumphant laugh. But nothing came, and then the realization hit. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a lesson. This was abandonment, pure and deliberate. A wave of humiliation washed over me, hotter than any anger. She had left me like someone leaving behind luggage they no longer wanted to drag. And worse, she wanted me to know it. I stepped outside again, the cold air slapping me awake. The night stretched long and merciless. Snowflakes drifted under the street lamps, catching the light like fragments of broken glass. I started walking, pulling my suitcase behind me, wheels rattling on uneven pavement. The city loomed ahead, lights shimmering on the horizon, a place of strangers, of tongues I didn't speak. Each step echoed louder in my mind than it did on the street. What am I without her? The question circled like a hawk overhead, hunting me. For years, I'd been her shadow, her anchor, her constant. Without her, I wasn't sure what remained. As I walked further from the airport, the weight of the betrayal pressed harder. My ring finger felt like it was burning under the metal. My chest tightened with every breath. Each inhale sharp, as if the air itself wanted to cut me open. I don't know how long I wandered. My feet were numb, my face raw. The city grew closer. Its sounds faint but steady. Somewhere between exhaustion and despair, I let the suitcase go. It tipped onto its side in the snow, forgotten like me. And then, "Excuse me," a voice said, soft, accented, cutting through the silence like a bell. I turned. A woman stood a few steps behind me, her scarf pulled tight against the cold, her eyes steady on mine. "Are you lost?" she asked. The question hung in the air, simple but devastating. Lost. The word pierced deeper than she could know. I opened my mouth, but no answer came. My throat clenched, my voice gone. All I could do was nod. She stepped closer, her presence carrying warmth despite the snow around us. And in that moment, frozen, abandoned, hollow, I realized this voice, this stranger, might be the first human tether I had left in the world. If you'd asked me years ago how I imagined my marriage would end, I might have said in old age, holding hands across a hospital bed, whispering thanks for a lifetime shared. I never pictured airports in snow, abandonment and silence. But maybe, looking back, the signs had always been there, tiny cracks in the foundation I pretended not to see. I met her on a summer evening at a friend's birthday party. I remember the exact detail that first caught me, the scent of her perfume drifting through the air before I even turned to see her face. Jasmine with something sharper beneath, a note that made me lean in before I knew her name. When I finally saw her, she was laughing, full-bodied, unashamed, commanding the attention of everyone around. I was quiet back then, steady, the kind of man who didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. She noticed me because I was one of the only ones not pushing to impress her. Or maybe she liked that I looked impressed already. She called me her rock early on, said she needed someone like me to balance her chaos. I wore that title like a medal, not realize it was a leash. Those first months, everything was intoxicating. She wrote me notes on napkins, texted at midnight just to say she missed me, left her scarf draped on my chair, so I'd smell her when she was gone. I convinced myself it was love. Real once-in-a-lifetime love. But even then, there were red flags. Nights when she disappeared with friends, returning at dawn with lipstick smudged and excuses rehearsed. Stories that changed mid-sentence. The way she mocked me when I questioned her. Don't be boring. Don't be insecure. My friends warned me. My brother once pulled me aside after family dinner and said, "She's playing with you. Be careful." But I told myself they didn't understand. They hadn't seen the softer side of her, the morning she curled against me, whispering about her dreams, or the way she pressed my hand to her heart and said, "No one else makes me feel safe." So I ignored the doubts. I mistook her unpredictability for passion, her cruelty for humor. When we got married, it was in a small ceremony. I remember sliding the ring onto her finger, my hands trembling. The silver band I wore felt like the completion of something sacred. I promised her forever, and in my heart, forever wasn't negotiable. She smiled at me that day like she'd won something. And maybe she had. The sacrifices started soon after. I gave up a promising job offer in another city so she could chase her career. She said, "We'll move once I'm established." Years passed. We never moved. When she wanted the dream house, the one with the wide windows and the staircase she'd always imagined, I drained my savings. She promised we'd rebuild together, but the account stayed empty. When she stayed out late, I told myself trust was the price of love. When she laughed at my worries, I told myself humor was her love language. When she belittled my dreams, I convinced myself I was being too sensitive. Piece by piece, I disappeared. My reflection became unfamiliar. My clothes chosen to fit her taste. My cologne replaced with the one she said made me smell like money. My hobbies abandoned because they took up too much time. I became her shadow, her dependable backdrop, the rock she leaned on when she needed, the wall she pushed against when she grew restless. And yet, I held on to symbols like lifelines. The ring on my finger, cool and solid. The photographs on our mantel, her smile pressed against mine, as if permanence could be captured in pixels. Even the scent of her perfume, lingering on my coats, reminded me of those early days when I thought love was simple. I told myself those symbols meant something, that they anchored me. But anchors, I learned, don't just keep you steady. They also keep you stuck. I remember the night before our trip to Sweden. She was packing frantically, throwing clothes into her suitcase like she was running from something. I watched from the doorway, holding her passport and tickets she'd left on the dresser. "You always move too slowly," she teased, glancing at me. "Don't slow me down over there. Try to keep up." I laughed, not realizing the words carried a darker truth. On the flight, she barely spoke to me. She scrolled through her phone, earbuds in, tapping her foot to a rhythm I couldn't hear. I stared at the window, watching the clouds blur past, trying to ignore the gnawing ache in my chest. At one point, I reached for her hand. She let me hold it, but her fingers were limp, her attention elsewhere. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that once we landed, we'd reconnect, we'd explore together, maybe even rediscover the spark we'd lost. Instead, hours later, I found myself outside a foreign airport, staring at a message that ended everything with a winking emoji. Looking back now, I wonder if she planned it long before. Maybe the Sweden trip was never about us. Maybe it was her final performance, her way of proving she had the power to humiliate me in the most elaborate stage she could find. All I know is this: the promises I thought held us together were the very threads that tightened around my throat. The noose hadn't been thrown over my neck in Sweden. It had been tightening for years. I just hadn't noticed until I was already gasping for air. The city swallowed me. Stockholm at night was both beautiful and merciless. Street lamps threw pale circles of light onto the snow, where footprints melted into slush before freezing over again. I dragged my suitcase behind me, its wheels clattering on uneven cobblestones, the sound far too loud for how invisible I felt. Hours must have passed. My phone screen told me it was close to midnight, though time had lost its meaning. Every attempt I made to call her ended the same: a quick disconnect, the cold finality of being blocked. I stared at the contact name, Anna Redheart, and realized how ridiculous the heart looked now, like graffiti on a gravestone. I wandered into the city center, desperate for somewhere to sit, somewhere to think. I found a bench under a flickering light. Snow had piled on the wooden slats, but I didn't care. I brushed it aside with my sleeve and collapsed onto it, my breath forming white clouds that hung in the air before vanishing. That's when I reached for my wall again, as if hope might have magically replaced what was missing. But no, still just a few crumpled bills, no cards. She had them. Of course she did. My mind replayed the airport scene in slow motion. The way I'd looked around expecting her to appear, the stupid smile I'd worn when I read her message. Humiliation burned hotter than the cold. How many strangers had seen me waiting like a fool? How many would laugh if they knew the truth? I pulled my scarf tight around my neck, inhaling. The faint scent of her perfume still clung to it. Jasmine, sharp and sweet. Once it had comforted me. Now it made me want to tear the fabric off and fling it into the street. But I didn't. Instead, I pressed it hard against my face, as if forcing myself to choke on the memory. I opened my phone again, desperate enough to call her family. Her sister answered, the background noise of a party spilling through the line. Laughter, clinking glasses, music thumping. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice raw, trembling. There was a pause, then a smirk in her tone. "She's fine. Don't worry so much. Put her on. Please." More laughter in the background. A male voice, maybe her brother, muttered something I couldn't quite catch. Then clearer, mocking, "He'll be fine. It's just a lesson." The line went dead. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, my chest hollow. A lesson. That's all I was to them. A man to be taught, humiliated, discarded like a child who needed correction. My hand clenched around the phone, so tightly I thought it might crack. Instead, I dropped it onto the snow at my feet. It landed face up, the screen glowing weakly until it dimmed and went black. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands pressed to my face. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The silence around me was too vast, too indifferent, swallowing any noise I could have made. That's when I felt it. The ring on my finger digging into my skin. I twisted it, hard, until the metal cut a faint line across my flesh. That ring had been my anchor, my promise, my proof that I wasn't alone. Now it mocked me, a perfect, unbroken circle that bound me to a woman who'd thrown me away. I thought about pulling it off, throwing it into the snow, but I couldn't. Not yet. Some stubborn part of me refused to let go, as if admitting defeat would kill me faster than the cold. My thoughts spiraled. Images flashed unbidden. Her smile pressed against mine in photos, her voice whispering promises in the dark, the house we'd fill with furniture I could barely afford. Every memory twisted into something grotesque. The woman I had loved felt like a stranger I'd never really known. The humiliation wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the voice inside me, whispering that maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't enough. Not exciting enough. Not strong enough. Not something. Snowflakes landed on my sleeve, melting instantly into dark spots before freezing again. I stared at them until my vision blurred. I felt less than human, like a ghost drifting through a city that didn't care if I vanished. And in that moment, I considered it. Just vanishing. Walking into the night and never coming back. Letting the cold do its work. It would be quiet. Easy. But then something shifted. A spark, faint but real, ignited inside me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was survival instinct. Or maybe it was the echo of every sacrifice I'd made, every part of myself I'd given away, demanding to be reclaimed. I realized, sitting there with snow gathering on my shoulders, that if I survived this night, if I endured, it wouldn't be for her. It wouldn't be for anyone. It would be for me. The thought scared me, but it also steadied me. I picked up my phone one last time. The battery was at 6%. I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Then, without letting myself hesitate, I stood and hurled it into the snowbank across the street. It disappeared with a muffled crunch. A clean break. The silence that followed was absolute. But for the first time, it didn't feel like suffocation. It felt like power. I sat back down, clutching my ringed hand, breathing in the frozen air until it burned my lungs. The city lights flickered in the distance, and I knew I had a choice. To remain the man she had broken, or become someone she would never recognize again. The choice wasn't made fully that night. But the seed was planted, small and stubborn, buried beneath the snow. And seeds, even frozen, have a way of finding light. The morning came without mercy. I woke up on that same bench where exhaustion had dragged me under. My scarf, stiff with frost, clung to my skin. The air carried the metallic bite of winter, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. Then the memories hit like a collapsing wall. Anna, her laughter echoing through the phone line. The cold cut deeper. My body ached. My hands were numb, my legs heavy. I pushed myself upright, brushing snow from my coat, and looked around. Stockholm was stirring. The sound of trams rolling, the murmur of commuters hurrying past with steaming cups of coffee. They all looked like they belonged. I felt like an intruder who had overstayed his welcome. I started walking, my suitcase dragging behind me like a wounded animal. The city was clean, orderly, but it might as well have been another planet. Street signs I couldn't read. Conversations in a language I didn't understand. The ring on my finger weighed heavier than the suitcase. That's when I saw her. She stood near the tram stop, wrapped in a wool coat the color of ash. But it was a scarf that caught me, the deep cobalt blue of it, vivid against a monochrome morning. Her hair spilled like winter sunlight across her shoulders. She noticed me watching, not with suspicion, but with something softer. Curiosity. When the tram pulled in, I thought she would leave. Instead, she stepped away, her boots crunching on the icy ground. She approached me, her gaze steady. "You look lost," she said. Her accent was lilting, Swedish but touched with something melodic. For a moment, I couldn't answer. My throat felt dry. Lost wasn't strong enough a word. Abandoned, gutted, erased, that was closer. "Yes," I finally whispered. She tilted her head. "Do you have somewhere to go?" I laughed bitterly, though no humor lived in it. Not anymore. Something flickered in her expression. She hesitated, then pulled her scarf tighter around her neck as if thinking, "Come, there's a cafe just around the corner. You look like you could use warmth." I should have refused. Pride snarled in me, reminded me I was a grown man who didn't need pity. But pride hadn't kept me from freezing last night. Pride hadn't filled my stomach. So I followed. The cafe was small, dimly lit. The kind of place where steam fogged the windows and the smell of fresh bread wrapped around you like a blanket. She ordered in Swedish, words flowing effortlessly, then gestured for me to sit. Minutes later, a steaming bowl of soup and a dark rye sandwich sat in front of me. "Eat," she said simply. I wanted to ask why she cared, but hunger was louder than curiosity. I ate, slowly at first, then faster, until I realized she was watching with gentle smile, like someone tending a wounded bird. When the edge of hunger dulled, I finally looked at her properly. Her eyes were the pale blue of glacial ice, sharp yet calm. "My name is Elsa," she said. Of course it was. The universe had a cruel sense of irony. I gave her mine, though it felt strange, like speaking on behalf of someone else. The man with that name had been a husband, a provider, a fool. Who was I now? "You don't need to tell me everything," Elsa said quietly, as if reading my hesitation. "But sometimes telling something helps." The words sat between us. I wanted to spit them out, all the betrayal, the humiliation, the shame, but they lodged in my throat. Instead, I pulled at my ring, twisting it until my skin reddened. Elsa's gaze followed the motion, and for the first time, I felt exposed, naked. "She left you?" she asked, not unkindly. I nodded. Her expression softened further. "Then she has no idea what she's lost." The words pierced me deeper than I expected. No empty comfort, no false sympathy. Just a statement, calm and steady. For the first time in days, I believed it might be true. I stayed in that cafe longer than I should have. Elsa told me about her work. An artist, she said, painting winter landscapes that never sold but gave her peace. She showed me a small sketchbook she carried, pages filled with charcoal sketches of bridges, trees, the way light bent across frozen water. She asked nothing of me, demanded no explanations, and in that silence, I began to breathe again. When I finally stood to leave, she unwound her blue scarf and held it out. "You need it more than I do," she said. I shook my head. "I can't take that." But she insisted, wrapping it loosely around my neck before I could protest. The wool was warm, carrying her faint scent of pine and something floral, not cloying like Anna's perfume, but grounding, like the earth itself. "Keep it," she said. "Consider a promise that you'll stay warm until you find your way." I wanted to tell her that promises had become shackles to me, that every vow now felt like a trap. But the scarf was soft against my skin, and something in her eyes told me this promise was different. Not a chain, an offering. That night, I didn't return to the bench. Elsa had shown me a hostel nearby, cheap but clean, filled with other travelers who carried their lives in backpacks. I checked in, trading what little cash I had left for 3 nights. In the small, bare room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the scarf coiled in my hands, blue against white sheets. It reminded me of the sea I hadn't seen in years, of skies unbroken by storm. I thought of Anna again, but this time the image didn't crush me. It stung, yes, but like touching an old scar. Painful, but survivable. I slipped the ring from my finger, holding it up to the light. The circle glimmered, flawless, eternal. But eternity wasn't real. Not in love. Not in promises. I placed it inside the drawer, closed it, and lay back. For the first time since she abandoned me, I slept without the weight of silence pressing on my chest. In the days that followed, I walked through narrow streets lined with pastel-colored houses, across bridges spanning rivers that reflected the gray sky, into parks where snow muffled every sound, always with Elsa's scarf around my neck, a reminder that kindness could still exist, even when everything else had burned away. Each step felt like reclaiming something I had lost, my breath, my body, myself. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I was alive, And for now, that was enough. The scarf was the first thing I saw when I woke each morning. It lay draped across the chair by the window of my hostel room, catching the pale light of dawn. Cobalt blue, steady, a reminder that warmth could survive in the coldest places. I would wrap it around my neck, and something me straightened, as if the threads carried more than wool, like they carried the proof that not everyone in the world was cruel. It started with small steps. Elsa suggested I look for day work, anything that kept my hands moving. Movement heals, she said. I thought she meant physically. But when I began chopping behind a small cafe, when I carried crates for a fisherman at the harbor, when I scrubbed pans in the kitchen for a few kroner, it wasn't just my muscles that ached. My mind, too, loosened like a fist unclenching. At night, I would meet Elsa again. Sometimes at the cafe where we first sat, other times in her small studio, where canvases leaned against every wall. Her paintings were nothing like Anna's polished world. No sterile beauty, no manicured surfaces. Elsa's art was raw. Storms painted in broad strokes. Winter rivers that looked alive. Empty chairs and snowfields. One evening, I asked why she painted so much solitude. She smiled faintly. Because solitude isn't emptiness. It's space. A place where you find yourself again. Those words stuck with me. For years, I had filled every quiet moment with Anna. Her needs, her moods, her chaos. Solitude had become something to fear. But Elsa painted it like a gift. I began writing again. Not essays, not polished thoughts. Just scribbles in a worn journal I picked up from a second-hand shop. At first, the pages filled with rage, jagged words, curses, the weight of betrayal. But as weeks passed, the anger bent into reflection. I wrote about the first time Anna kissed me, the way her perfume clung to my shirt. I wrote about the house we bought, the paint I rolled onto the walls while she scrolled through her phone. I wrote about the ring, how it gleamed when I placed it on her finger, how it burned when it clung to mine. And I wrote about Elsa, the scarf, her silence, her eyes that didn't flinch when I told her I had been abandoned, stripped, humiliated. Writing became another kind of chopping wood, breaking down the mess into smaller pieces, making it manageable. Months passed, and I saw my reflection change. My cheeks sharpened, my shoulders broadened from labor. My eyes no longer looked hollow but focused. I wore the same old coat, but it hung differently now, not as armor, but as something I carried with ease. One night, Elsa studied me quietly across the cafe table. Then she said, "Your shoulders are different now." I laughed. What does that mean? You're carrying yourself, not her. The words landed like a bell struck inside my chest. For so long, I had been under Anna's weight, her judgments, her demands, her whims disguised as needs. Even when she wasn't there, I carried her voice like an iron yoke. And now it was lighter. It wasn't just about healing. Somewhere along the way, survival shifted into strategy. I started looking back, not with despair, but with clarity. My journal became evidence. Patterns emerged, lies I had ignored, withdrawals from our shared accounts, expenses that didn't line up. Through quiet searches on public computers, I pieced together more. Credit lines opened in my name. Funds funneled to accounts I never knew existed. She hadn't just abandoned me in Sweden. She had been bleeding me dry for years. At first, I shook with rage. I wanted to burn everything down. But Elsa's voice echoed movement heals. So I moved differently this time. I copied documents, saved files, recorded notes. Each piece was another log on a fire I was building inside me. One evening in Elsa's studio, I turned the ring over my palm. I had carried it like a stone in my pocket for months, unable to wear it, unable to throw it away. Elsa glanced up from her canvas. "You still keep it?" I nodded. "It's proof of what I survived, of what I won't forget." She set down her brush, walked to the window, and opened it. The night air swept in, smelling of snow and the sea. "Proof doesn't have to be carried forever," she said. We stood there, side by side, the ring gleaming in my hand. My throat tightened. I thought of Anna's laughter the night she left me, of her perfume filling our home while I sat alone waiting, of the phone call with her family, the ridicule in the background. And then I thought of the scarf, the blue of it, the warmth of a stranger who had no reason to care. I closed my eyes, whisper thank you, not to Anna, not even to fate, but to the pain itself. Because without it, I would never have stood here, stronger than I had ever been. I let the ring fall. It struck the frozen water below with a small, final sound. Not rage, not triumph, just release. In the weeks that followed, I prepared, calmly, methodically. I contacted lawyers back home, sent them the evidence I had gathered. Their replies came quickly. Fraud, grounds for divorce, even criminal charges. But my focus wasn't revenge anymore. It was closure. Elsa noticed a shift in me. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry. She simply painted. One night, she handed me a small canvas. It was a sea at dawn, streaked with light, endless. For when you go back, she said. I swallowed hard. You knew. Of course, she smiled softly. This was never your ending, only your beginning. Her words hit me with the quiet certainty of truth. The day I booked my flight, I walked with Elsa along the waterfront. The wind tugged at her blue scarf, the same one I still wore. We stood in silence, watching gulls wheel against the gray sky. Finally, she said, "Do you ever wonder why she did it?" I nodded. All the time. But I think I'm starting to see it wasn't about me. It was about her emptiness, her need to control something, someone. I was just available. Elsa's gaze lingered on me. Then you've already won. I didn't feel victorious. Not in the way movies show, not with grand gestures. But I felt something steadier, something new, self-possession. I reached for the scarf, starting to untangle it from my neck. I should return this. She stopped me with a hand. No, that's yours now. You've made it part of you. The scarf fluttered in the wind, blue against the white sky. I thought of the ring sinking into the sea, of the journal filling with words, of the man who had once sat shivering on a bench with nothing. That man was gone. In his place stood someone else. Someone ready. A week later, I boarded the flight. My suitcase was heavier with documents, journals, and Elsa's canvas. But my shoulders were lighter than they had been in years. As the plane lifted above the clouds, I looked out over the endless white expanse below. Anna had left me in the cold, thinking I would freeze. She was right about one thing. The man I had been was gone. But what she never imagined, what she could never control, was the man I had become in the fire of my own survival. And that was the man she would soon face. The air back home smelled different. It wasn't the sharp salt of the Stockholm waterfront, or the bite of snow in the lungs. It was stale with familiarity, the exhaust of morning traffic, the perfume of a city too busy to notice its own decay. As I stepped off the plane, suitcase in hand, I felt like a ghost returned to haunt his own life. I wore the scarf still. Elsa's cobalt blue clung around my neck like a banner, a reminder of where I'd risen from. The ring, now gone, lay somewhere in the Swedish harbor, swallowed by the sea. My pockets carried only documents, journals, and a new steadiness in my body. I wasn't returning to reclaim what was mine. I was returning to end what never truly belonged to me. The confrontation wasn't spontaneous. I planned it with the same precision I once used to build my life around Anna's needs. Only this time, the labor served me. My lawyer scheduled a meeting in a neutral office space, a sterile conference room with glass walls and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. She arrived late, as always. Anna walked in with her usual performance. Hair perfect, perfume thick and sweet, that smile she wore like a weapon. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes, as though she expected me to crawl back, humiliated, begging for scraps. But I didn't stand to greet her. I remained seated, calm, fingers resting on a neat stack of files. Elsa's scarf warmed my throat, and I thought, "Your shoulders are different now." "Hello," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I see you survived your little adventure." Her words should have cut, but they only echoed in the hollow where her power used to live. "I did," I said evenly, "and I came back to finish what you started." Her smile faltered just slightly. The lawyer spoke first, outlining the case. Fraud, unauthorized withdrawals, credit lines, each point laid bare with documents, signatures, undeniable proof. I watched Anna's face shift. Not guilt, not shame, but calculation. The same cold arithmetic she'd always done with people's lives. At one point, she laughed softly, shaking her head. It was just money. You always obsessed over details. You never knew how to have fun. The perfume hit me then, too sweet, cloying, desperate. Once it had pulled me in, clouded my judgment. Now it smelled like rot disguised with flowers. I leaned forward, voice steady. This isn't about money, Anna. This is about the night you left me stranded, alone, in a foreign country. Do you remember what you texted me? Her eyes narrowed. She didn't answer. I recited it anyway. The words seared into me. Good luck finding your way back. Consider this a prank winking face. Silence fell. Even she couldn't smile through that. You called it a prank, I continued. But it wasn't. It was cruelty. And I need you to understand something. That was the night I stopped being yours. That was the night I stopped belonging to anyone. Her jaw tightened, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. There were others present, legal aides, a representative from the bank, even her own lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The audience mattered. I wanted witnesses, not for revenge, but for truth. I laid the journals on the table, pages filled with my handwriting. This is my record, not of what you took, but of what I carried. Every lie, every moment of silence when I begged for your honesty, every night you came home smelling of cologne that wasn't mine, every humiliation you brushed off as me being insecure. This, I tapped the journal, is proof of the man you broke, and the man who rose anyway. Anna's mask cracked then, a flicker of rage, quickly smothered, but I saw it. For once, she wasn't in control of the story. You think you won? She spat. You think this makes you strong? I leaned back, loosening the scarf slightly. No, I don't need to win. I only need to be free. The legal proceedings dragged on, details and signatures and stamp papers. But the confrontation itself wasn't about the law. It was about the silence between us. The silence that had once been my prison, now my strength. At the end, when the agreements were signed, when the accounts were frozen, and the divorce filed, she tried one last weapon. You'll never find someone like me again, she said, her voice low, venomous. For the first time, I smiled. I know. That's the point. I walked out of that building into the crisp evening air. The city buzzed, people brushing past with their own burdens. But for me, something had lifted. My shoulders felt light, my chest open. The scarf fluttered in the wind, blue against the gray. I thought of the ring sinking into the Swedish sea, of Elsa's paintings of solitude, of her words. This was never your ending, only your beginning. She was right. Weeks later, I returned to Sweden. Not running this time, not broken, but by choice. I met Elsa by the waterfront where gulls circled and the horizon stretched wide. She was painting, brush sweeping across canvas. When she saw me, she smiled, not surprised, not questioning. Just a smile, steady and warm. I sat beside her, watching the tide shift against the rocks. The silence between us was different from Anna's. This silence wasn't absence. It was presence, space. She left me in the cold. I said quietly, almost to myself, thinking I'd freeze. Elsa dipped her brush into blue paint, the same shade as her scarf. But you didn't. I watched the sea. No, I found fire instead. And for the first time in my life, I believed it.